Now, we will be demonstrating how to set up Kubernetes cluster locally, and install Jenkins server onto it. For this purpose, we will be using Minikube. It sets up a single node local cluster and is the easiest way to work with Kubernetes, if you don't have to set up cloud infrastructure. To start with, we will install Minikube on our system. As we are working with Windows machine, we are using Choco Package Manager to install the software. Similarly, we can use curl to set up the software in Linux, and brew command for Mac OS. To find out if Minikube was installed properly, we can run Minikube version to check. It automatically installs kubectl2. To start Minikube, we can run Minikube start command. This will set up the Kubernetes cluster environment locally for us. At this point, we have a single node Kubernetes cluster environment up and running. To verify, you can run Minikube status. To get information about the nodes, we will use kubectl get nodes command. As you can see, we have one running node. Now to set up the deployment, you can clone this Git repository. Move into the cloned repository. To deploy a service, we need to create a YAML file that explains how to create the pod having a container running the required service. Some points to note. The file is defining a deployment, as indicated by the kind field. The deployment specifies a single replica. This ensures one and only one instance will be maintained by the replication controller in the event of failure. The container image name is Jenkins and version is 2.32.2. The list of ports specified within the spec are a list of ports to expose from the container on the pod's IP address. Jenkins running on HTTP port 8080. The pod exposes the port 8080 of the Jenkins container. To create the deployment, execute kubectl create command. We can check the created deployment by running kubectl get deployment command. At this point, Kubernetes has created one pod with Jenkins container in it. We can check the available containers using kubectl get pods command. As it stands, we have a Jenkins instance deployed, but it is still not accessible. The Jenkins pod has been assigned an IP address which is internal to the Kubernetes cluster. Of course, it's possible to log into the Kubernetes node and access Jenkins from there, but that's not a very useful way to access the service. To make Jenkins accessible outside the Kubernetes cluster, the pod needs to be exposed as a service. With a local deployment, this means creating a node port service type. A node port service type exposes a service on a port on each node in the cluster. It's then possible to access the service given the node IP address and the service node port. A simple service is defined below. Some points of note. The file is defining a service as indicated by the kind field. The service is of type node port. Other options are cluster IP, only accessible within the cluster, and load balancer, IP address assigned by a cloud provider, for example AWS Elastic IP. The list of ports specified within the spec are a list of ports exposed by this service. The port is the port that will be exposed by the service. The target port is the port to access on the pods targeted by this service. A port name may also be specified. The selector specifies the selection criteria for the pods targeted by this service. To create the service, execute kubectl create command. To validate that creating the service was successful, you can invoke kubectl get services command. So now that we have created a deployment and a service, how do we access Jenkins? From the output above, we can see that the service has been exposed on port 31796. We also know that because the service is of type node type, the service will route requests made to any node on this port to the Jenkins pod. All that's left for us is to determine the IP address of the Minikube VM. Minikube have made this really simple by including a specific command that outputs the IP address of the running cluster. Minikube IP. You can now access Jenkins instance at the following URL. However, We will need to find out the administrator password which is inside the container in the pod. To access that, we can SSH into the machine. To SSH into the pod, find the name of the pod by running kubectl get pods command. We can then SSH into the machine by using the following exec command. This will get you inside the container of the pod and we can find the password from within. Using this password, we can then complete the setup of the Jenkins server. Similarly, by changing few parameters in the setup YAML file we can easily add load balancer and auto-scaling to the deployed Jenkins server. This shows how conveniently we can set up the entire continuous integration and continuous deployment using Kubernetes, for various container images apart from Docker. Thank you.